Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, as always, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been a rough few weeks for stocks in the U.S. All three main indices down again on Monday. European stocks even worse off. What's the story there, and where do you see things going in the days or weeks to come?
Yes, as you said, Wall Street closed in red on Monday, and the S&P 500 linked its first four-day losing streak since February, as the investors await the fiscal uncertainties and rising COVID-19 cases in U.S. and Europe and India. If you look at the Europe, the most of the market fell more than 3%, biggest drop that we've seen in several months. Main reason for that is because maybe the economy might be closed again because of the extending COVID-19 cases. Clearly, this is putting pressures on overall market as the economic recovery might not be coming as people hope for. Also, the escalation between U.S. and China continues to happen as the Trump administration announced a ban on WeChat and TikTok, and this is definitely putting pressure. On top of this, we saw some of the news coming where the alleged laundering of the money by the commercial banks, such as J.P. Morgan's and Deutsche Banks and etc., and the total amount of these laundering might be quite significant, and that might result into significant penalties, and that resulted into massive decline in share prices for major financial stocks. So all this putting pressures. However, though, if you look at the NASDAQ, it recovered quite nicely from 2% plus drop to only about 0.1% drop. So clearly the overall earnings perspective and fundamentals seems to quite reasonably good for NASDAQ at this point.
Well, Korean stocks down today, too. The indices down by more than 2%. In fact, the KOSPI down back below 2,400 points. Tell us about the domestic markets.
Yes, as you said, the South Korean stocks extended losses quite significantly in the last 2 days. The KOSPI was down 1% and then 2.3%, and then KOSDAQ was down over 2.5% for 2 days consecutively. So huge drop that we saw there. Clearly, the valuation was the major concern. If you look at the KOSPI and KOSDAQ, particularly the KOSDAQ, the valuation expanded too quickly, and because the reason for that is because the KOSDAQ is the highest rising index amongst all the countries. So I guess this is a technical correction and also the valuation concern at this point in time. Now with the news that the additional budget coming through and some of the stabilities that we see in terms of the currency-wise, we might think that the KOSPI and KOSDAQ has kind of bottoming out for the time being. Hopefully, though, we need to see the recovery happening, but I think that the volatility might be remaining because of the uncertainty regarding the U.S. election. We don't see what kind of conclusion will come through as the Trump and Biden seems to be kind of in a heavy fight at this point in time.
Yes, and over the past week or so, an interesting story. We've seen the Korean won strengthen against the U.S. dollar significantly. We've come from the 11.90 range down to about 11.60. What's happening with the exchange rate?
Right. With that kind of news, we saw quite resilience of the Korean equity market as the currency continued to appreciate from 11.80 level to 11.60 territories. And that resulted into some of the major stocks showing quite a resilient performance. However, starting yesterday, if you look at the overall, the dollar index, it kind of bottomed out around 92 and it jumped to close to 93.5. And we see that appreciation of Korean won seems to be kind of staggering now. And because of this, major, I guess, the outperformance kind of corrected itself, and that the Korean market corrected heavily. Looking into the future in terms of whether the currency might change in the future, I doubt that is going to be the case, as the currency-wise, the U.S. dollar index might stabilize around 93 to 94 range, because that's what probably the Trump government wants at this point in time. The continuation of weak dollar is not necessarily positive news for the government itself. So we think that the currency might stabilize, and therefore the Korean won also will stabilize on 1160 to 1170 range. If that's the case, the currency is not going to be a major impact for the equity market. I think the more important factor is what's happening to the fiscal policy and monetary policy, and we think that these trends seems to be quite positive at this point in time.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.